Black nurse took a bullet for a Marine. Hospital fired her, but the country turned her into a hero. The moment Elijah Morris walked into the community health clinic, no one could have guessed what was about to unfold. A quiet checkup on Veterans Day that would change 2 lives forever. Who was this man, a retired Marine carrying unseen wounds? And how would a single encounter with a nurse named Danielle shift the course of his and her story in ways no one expected? This isn't just another hospital visit. It's the beginning of something extraordinary. The rain drummed steadily against the windows, casting a muted soundtrack over the clinic's bustling interior. Elijah's heavy boots left damp prints on the tiled floor as he stepped inside, each step measured, as if the weight of his past battles lingered with him still. His face was calm but guarded, a man shaped by experience and silence, carrying scars deeper than any visible to the eye. Veterans Day had drawn a larger crowd than usual to the clinic. The waiting room hummed with quiet conversations, muted laughter, and the rustling of paperwork. But Elijah wanted none of it. He wasn't here for recognition or thanks. His goal was simple, a checkup, then to disappear back into the shadows of his own life. As he moved toward the reception desk to sign in, a figure passed by with a grace that cut through the noise, a woman with a calm strength and an air of quiet authority. Danielle Harmon, a registered nurse, carried herself with a poise that commanded respect without a word. Her name tag glinted in the soft clinic light. Their eyes met for a brief, fleeting moment. Elijah offered a nod, a gesture of acknowledgement from one warrior to another. Danielle's steady gaze held something deeper, a recognition of the unspoken burdens carried by those who serve. In that instant, neither could have predicted how profoundly their lives would soon intersect. Danielle moved through the clinic with a practiced ease that spoke of years spent in the trenches of healthcare, where every second mattered and every decision could mean the difference between life and death. To her, the patients weren't just appointments, they were stories waiting to be heard, lives entrusted to her care. Elijah took a seat at the edge of the waiting room, his posture stiff but purposeful. His fingers tapped restlessly against the armrest, a silent rhythm born of nerves and restraint. Though surrounded by others, he seemed alone, wrapped in a bubble of his own thoughts and memories. Across the room, Danielle glanced his way again, sensing a quiet storm beneath his composed exterior. She had learned to read people not just by their words, but by what they didn't say, the hesitation, the shadows in their eyes. There was a story here, she thought, one that needed more than a routine checkup. The clinic's atmosphere was a delicate balance between calm and urgency. Nurses moved with urgency tempered by compassion. Patients shuffled through the system, some hopeful, others resigned. Elijah was just one among many, but fate had a way of singling out certain lives for moments that would ripple far beyond the clinic walls. Veterans Day was more than a date on the calendar. It was a day heavy with remembrance and respect, a day when silent sacrifices were honored and invisible wounds acknowledged. Elijah carried both physical injuries and emotional scars. The stiffness in his movements spoke of battles fought abroad and struggles endured in silence. As Danielle prepared for the next patient, her thoughts briefly touched on her own family's military history. Her father had been a Marine, a fact she rarely spoke of but never forgot. It was a connection she shared only with those who understood the complex legacy of service, the pride, the pain, and the price. Elijah noticed the subtle change in her demeanor as she entered the exam room, clipboard in hand and a warm, measured smile on her face. Their initial exchange was brief, polite, a dance of guarded words and mutual respect. But as Danielle checked his pulse and reviewed his x-rays, a different conversation began, one that went beyond symptoms and charts. "My father was a Marine," Danielle said quietly, her voice soft but steady. Elijah's eyes flicked up, curiosity mingling with surprise. "Did he make it back?" he asked, his tone cautious but sincere. Danielle paused, a shadow passing over her expression. "Physically, yes," she answered. "But not all of them." The room fell into a quiet stillness. There was no need for more words. The silence spoke volumes. Both understood the cost of war, not just the wounds on the body, but those carried deep inside. In that quiet space, an unspoken bond began to form. Elijah found himself watching Danielle as she worked, noticing the focused determination in her eyes, the gentle care with which she treated her patients. There was strength in her kindness, a resilience that mirrored his own. The appointment ended far too soon, and as Danielle left the room, Elijah felt a strange sense of loss, though he barely knew the woman who had just cared for him. It was the beginning of something neither of them could have anticipated, a connection forged in understanding, soon to be tested by events neither could control. Outside the exam room, the clinic carried on with its steady rhythm, unaware that these quiet moments were the calm before a storm. Elijah returned to the waiting area, his mind racing despite the stillness of his body. Veterans Day had started with routine checkups and silent prayers. But beneath the surface, the day was already shifting toward moments of courage, sacrifice, and a bond that would redefine what it meant to protect and be protected. Elijah and Danielle, two strangers brought together by circumstance, were on the brink of a story that would capture hearts, challenge assumptions, and remind everyone watching that heroes often appear when least expected. Because sometimes, the smallest moments, the briefest nod, a shared glance, are the ones that change everything. The exam room was quiet except for the soft scratch of Danielle's pen against the clipboard and the faint hum of the clinic's fluorescent lights overhead. Danielle stepped inside, her presence calm but purposeful. In one hand she held her notes, in the other, an unwavering warmth that seemed to soften the sterile space around her. Her smile wasn't flashy or forced. It was the kind of smile that carried understanding, the kind that made even the toughest walls crack just enough to let a little light in. Elijah sat on the examination table, his posture rigid, eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the room's pale walls. He offered only polite nods and brief answers, the kind that said, "I'm here because I have to be, not because he wanted to be." But Danielle had a way about her, an ease, a gentle confidence, that made it hard to stay closed off. She didn't push or pry. Instead, she let her care show in small gestures, in the softness of her tone as she began the routine checks. "Let me check your pulse," she said, extending her hand in a way that felt more like an offer of peace than a medical request. Elijah held out his wrist, and she placed her fingers lightly, steady and sure. The rhythm was strong, but beneath it, she sensed a tension, something guarded. Danielle glanced at the screen showing his x-rays, images that spoke of past battles etched into bone and tissue. The injuries were old, yet the pain they carried was real and unrelenting. As she worked, Danielle broke the silence with a quiet confession. "My father was a Marine, too," she said, almost as if testing the waters. Elijah's eyes flicked up sharply at that. For a moment, his usual reserve gave way to something softer, almost curious. "He make it back?" The question was simple but loaded with history. Danielle paused, the weight of the answer settling between them. "Physically, yes," she said finally, "but not all of them." Her voice was steady, but the truth lingered heavily in the air. It wasn't just about the body. It was the parts you couldn't see, the pieces left behind on battlefields and in the mind. The room seemed to hold its breath, filled with a silence that wasn't awkward but deeply understood. Elijah absorbed her words, recognizing the unspoken pain, the shared experience of survival marked by loss. This was no ordinary checkup. It was a meeting of two lives shaped by sacrifice and the quiet struggles that follow. Danielle's eyes met Elijah's again, and in that gaze, something shifted. It was a bond formed not from grand gestures, but from the raw, honest acknowledgement of what it means to carry invisible wounds. For a fleeting moment, the distance between nurse and patient narrowed, replaced by a silent promise that they weren't alone. As the appointment came to an end, Danielle prepared to leave. Elijah sat still, watching her go with a mix of gratitude and something he hadn't expected, trust. The stranger who had entered the room with a clipboard and a calm smile was already becoming more than a nurse. She was becoming a protector, someone who might understand what it meant to be strong and vulnerable all at once. Outside the exam room, the clinic's usual buzz carried on, but inside, a quiet understanding had taken root, one that would grow and bind their stories in ways neither could foresee. Elijah didn't know it yet, but this chance encounter on Veterans Day was the beginning of a connection that would test courage, reveal humanity, and ultimately change both their lives forever. Late afternoon settled over the clinic like a heavy sigh. The usual rhythm of footsteps, low conversations, and the occasional rustle of paperwork filled the air. Patients waited, nurses moved efficiently from room to room, and the day ticked on without incident. Then, without warning, a sharp shout shattered the calm. The sound cut through the air, raw and urgent, snapping everyone to attention. From the entrance burst a man, wild-eyed, frantic, and carrying a firearm. His movements were erratic, fueled by anger and desperation. The peaceful hum of the clinic was replaced by chaos in an instant. Patients screamed, ducking behind chairs and tables. Nurses shouted orders, trying to corral the panic and protect the vulnerable. Fear rippled through the room, thick and palpable. Elijah's body reacted before his mind could process. His military training took over, instincts honed through years of conflict. He rose from his seat, every muscle tense and ready. His eyes scanned the room, searching for the most vulnerable. A small child sat frozen nearby, eyes wide with terror. Elijah stepped forward, placing himself between the gunman and the child, a shield born of reflex and courage. But his injury, the reminder of past battles and wounds still healing, slowed him. His body wasn't as quick or strong as it once was. Every movement carried the ache of pain and limitation. The man's rage was a storm, unpredictable and dangerous, closing in fast. From down the hallway, Danielle saw it all unfold in a heartbeat. She caught sight of Elijah standing exposed, a target in the crossfire. Without hesitation, she moved. There was no time to think, no room for doubt. Instinct propelled her forward, her steps quick and determined. The gunman fired. The blast was deafening, ripping through the air and shattering the fragile moment. Danielle lunged just in time, crashing into Elijah with force that knocked them both down. The world seemed to slow, a blur of movement and sound fading to a sharp focus on the present. For a moment, there was only the sound of Danielle's shallow breathing, ragged but alive. Blood began to spread across her scrubs, a dark, blooming stain that stole the light from the room. Elijah stared down at her, horror and disbelief crashing through him like a tidal wave. She hadn't hesitated. Not for a second. The chaos around them seemed distant now, muted by the shock that settled deep in Elijah's chest. Nurses and patients alike froze, their eyes wide, their breaths held tight. The man with the gun was suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of what he'd done. The firing stopped. Silence descended, heavy and unbearable. Elijah's hands trembled as he reached for Danielle, trying to steady her, trying to understand how someone could be so brave, so selfless. Her eyes met his briefly, flickering with pain but shining with resolve. In that glance, Elijah saw a fierce protector, the kind of courage that doesn't roar, but stands firm in the face of darkness. Time fractured into pieces. Seconds stretched into eternity as help rushed in: paramedics, doctors, voices calling orders. Elijah stayed by Danielle's side, refusing to let go, his mind swirling with guilt and desperation. She had saved him. She had taken the bullet meant for him. And now, she was fighting for her life. The clinic, once a place of routine care and quiet healing, had become the stage for a moment none would forget, a moment of raw humanity, of sacrifice, and the fragile thread that connects strangers in the darkest hours. Elijah's world narrowed to the woman bleeding beside him, the echo of the gunshot still ringing in his ears, and the unspoken vow forming in his heart. He would not let her courage go unnoticed. Not now. Not ever. The trauma bay buzzed with urgency, a blur of white coats, masked faces, and the relentless beeping of monitors. Inside, Danielle lay on a narrow operating table, surrounded by a team of surgeons working with precise, frantic movements. The steady rhythm of their efforts contrasted sharply with the storm of chaos and fear swirling just beyond the sterile walls. Outside the operating room, Elijah paced back and forth in the waiting area, his hands stained with blood, not his own, but hers. The red smears on his palms felt like a brand, a harsh reminder of what had just happened. His steps were restless, uneven, echoing off the cold tile floors. He couldn't stop the images from cycling in his mind: the man's furious shout, the deafening gunshot, Danielle's sudden fall. His heart hammered in his chest, each beat pounding guilt and fury into his veins. Why her? Why not him? These questions twisted relentlessly, gnawing at the edges of his sanity. He clenched the armrest of the plastic chair until his knuckles turned white, his face blank yet trembling with a rage he couldn't fully contain. Every sound around him was sharp, every whisper piercing. The waiting room felt like a cage, suffocating and unforgiving. People moved past, faces blurred in his vision, voices fading into a distant hum. Time itself seemed fractured, moments stretching endlessly as he wrestled with a storm inside that no one could see. Then, finally, the door to the trauma bay opened. A doctor stepped out, exhaustion etched deep into his eyes beneath the surgical mask. Elijah stopped mid-pace, his breath hitching as the weight of those few steps carried the fate of the woman who had risked everything for him. The doctor's voice was steady but heavy with unspoken truths. She's stable, but in critical condition. Elijah nodded, jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. The word stable offered a fragile thread of hope, but critical was a stark reminder that the battle was far from over. The doctor hesitated, searching Elijah's face as if deciding how much to say. Then, quietly but firmly, he added, "She saved your life." Those words hit Elijah like a blow. He swallowed hard, feeling the truth resonate deep within him. She wasn't just a nurse or a stranger anymore. Danielle was the woman who had thrown herself into danger without a second thought, whose courage had pulled him back from the edge. Elijah didn't speak. Words failed him. Instead, he felt the weight of what she had done settle over every fiber of his being. This woman, who had been a stranger just hours ago, had become his protector. She had taken a bullet meant for him, had given him a chance to live when she risked losing everything. His fists unclenched slowly, trembling. He thought about the quiet strength in her eyes earlier that day, the warmth of her smile, the bond that had flickered in a brief conversation. Now those memories were etched in sharper relief, symbols of sacrifice and grace under fire. Around him, the waiting room remained a blur, but Elijah's world had narrowed down to one thought, one vow. He would not let her sacrifice be forgotten. He would carry her story, honor her courage, and fight for the recognition she deserved. Minutes stretched on like hours as he stayed rooted to that spot, unable to move or think beyond the fragile hope that Danielle would pull through. The silent promise echoed louder than any siren or shouted order. This was just the beginning. Because some acts of bravery change everything, not just the lives saved, but the people forever touched by their heroism. The first thing Danielle noticed when she woke was the scent, sharp, clinical, antiseptic, filling the air like a cold fog. The steady beep of a heart monitor punctuated the silence, a slow, relentless rhythm that anchored her to the present. Her body was heavy, her shoulder burning with a dull, persistent ache that reminded her she was still alive. She blinked against the harsh light, the sterile white walls of the hospital room coming into focus. Around her, the signs of care were unmistakable. Flowers brightened the windowsill, their colors vivid against the cold sterility. Cards and notes cluttered the bedside table, messages of hope, prayers, gratitude. One note caught her eye, written in a familiar scrawl. "You saved me. I'll never let that go. Elijah." Her lips curved into a weak smile. She remembered him, the man she barely knew who had somehow become a part of her story, someone she had protected at the cost of everything. But even as her body began the slow work of healing, a heavier, more suffocating weight settled over her. The door opened without warning, and in walked two figures, hospital administrators, faces unreadable, their expressions carefully neutral, their movements measured and cold. They carried with them the invisible burden of rules and regulations, the kind that often leave no room for mercy or understanding. One of them stepped forward, a thin envelope in hand. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with unspoken tension. Danielle's heart sank as the letter was placed before her, the words glaring back like a judge's verdict. "Due to breach of conduct during a violent incident, your employment is terminated." The words hit her harder than any bullet. She blinked slowly, trying to process what she'd just heard. Her mind raced, searching for a way to argue, to explain, to fight. "I protected someone," she said, her voice steady but tinged with disbelief. "I saved a life." The administrator's reply was mechanical, devoid of empathy. "You broke protocol. No ceremony, no apology, no recognition of the sacrifice. Just the cold finality of the system enforcing its rules." They turned and left, leaving Danielle alone in the sterile room, the quiet closing in around her like a shroud. She lay back against the pillow, staring at the ceiling above, the same ceiling she'd glimpsed before fading into unconsciousness. Saving a life had cost her her career. The weight of that truth settled deep, a bitter pill lodged in her throat. Her mind replayed the moment over and over. The shot, the fall, the decision made in an instant. There had been no hesitation. In that split second, protocol meant nothing. There was only the need to protect, to act, to live. And now, the very institution that should have honored her courage had turned its back. Days passed in a blur of recovery and quiet reflection. Nurses and friends visited, their voices soft with sympathy, their eyes filled with unspoken questions. Danielle's body healed, but the wound left by betrayal throbbed beneath the surface. Elijah's visits were the light in the darkness. He came bearing strength and gratitude, his presence a reminder that what she had done mattered to someone. But even his unwavering support couldn't erase the sting of being cast aside by the place she had devoted her life to. In the solitude of her hospital room, Danielle wrestled with the harsh reality. Courage wasn't meant to be punished. Protecting life was her calling, and yet she found herself condemned for answering it in the moment it mattered most. As she lay there, she made a silent promise, not just to herself, but to every soul who needed someone to stand in the breach. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a fight to reclaim her dignity, to shine a light on injustice, and to prove that true heroism can't be measured by rules alone. Because sometimes, the greatest acts of bravery come with the highest cost. Elijah sat in the dim glow of his laptop screen, the weight of the past days pressing heavily on his chest. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the raw intensity of frustration and purpose burning in his eyes. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, knowing this moment could change everything, not just for Danielle, but for anyone who'd ever felt silenced or overlooked. He clicked record. "My name is Elijah Morris," he began, his voice calm but charged with conviction. "I'm a Marine. I've been through war. I've faced danger and loss in ways most people can't imagine." He paused, swallowing the lump rising in his throat. "But last week, something happened that shook me to my core." He leaned forward, eyes locking with the camera as if speaking directly to every viewer. "I was nearly killed, right here at home, in a place I thought was safe. And the only reason I'm still here today is because a nurse named Danielle Harmon jumped in front of me and took a bullet." The words hung heavy in the air, raw and undeniable. Elijah's voice cracked as he continued. She didn't have to. She wasn't trained for combat. She was just doing her job. But when the moment came, she made a choice, one that saved my life and changed everything for both of us. He looked down for a second, then back up with fierce determination. "Now, Danielle is lying in a hospital bed, recovering from that same bullet. And she's just been fired. Fired for what? For breaking some stupid protocol. For protecting a life. For being brave." His jaw tightened. "That's wrong. It's not just wrong, it's an outrage." Elijah's voice broke near the end, the emotion impossible to hide. "Danielle didn't just save me. She reminded me what courage looks like, what sacrifice means. And now, we owe her more than just thanks. We owe her justice." He stopped recording and sat back, the room silent except for the faint hum of the computer. Without hesitation, he uploaded the video, sharing it across every social platform he knew. He sent it to veteran groups, nursing organizations, and community pages, anywhere he thought it might find a voice. Within hours, the video exploded. Thousands of views turned into hundreds of thousands, then millions. People shared it relentlessly, moved by the raw honesty and the stark injustice. Veterans posted their own stories of sacrifice and solidarity. Nurses spoke out, echoing Elijah's outrage, sharing how Danielle's bravery embodied the spirit of their profession. Families, strangers, and advocates all rallied together, their voices weaving into a powerful chorus demanding change. News outlets caught wind of the story and descended on the clinic like a storm. Reporters flooded the waiting rooms and hallways, cameras rolling, microphones poised. The hospital administration found themselves under intense scrutiny, forced to answer questions they hadn't anticipated. Statements were issued, damage control attempted, but the tide of public opinion was relentless. Elijah watched it all unfold, feeling a mix of vindication and hope. What had started as a desperate plea had transformed into a movement, one that refused to let Danielle's sacrifice be erased by bureaucracy or indifference. On social media, hashtags trended. Hashtag Justice for Danielle. Hashtag Hero Not Protocol. Hashtag Stand with Danielle. Petitions circulated, calling for her reinstatement and recognition. Local politicians weighed in, veterans groups organized rallies, and the conversation grew louder, impossible to ignore. But amid the chaos, Elijah's focus remained unwavering. This was about more than a job or a hospital policy. It was about honoring courage, protecting those who protect us, and standing up when the system fails. He thought back to Danielle's quiet strength in the exam room, her calm under pressure, and the moment she had risked everything without hesitation. That woman was a hero, and now the world was beginning to see it too. As the movement gained momentum, Elijah prepared for what came next, a fight not just for Danielle's career, but for every frontline worker who'd ever been silenced, overlooked, or punished for doing the right thing. Because sometimes, a single voice is all it takes to ignite a fire that can't be put out. The day Danielle was honored nationally was a turning point, not just for her, but for everyone who had followed her story, cheered for her courage, and demanded justice. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that precedes moments destined to be remembered. Outside the grand hall, Flags waved gently in the breeze, their red, white, and blue colors rippling like the heartbeat of a nation. Inside, the room buzzed with quiet energy. Veterans, nurses, community leaders, and reporters filled the seats. Cameras flashed, capturing every glance, every smile, every tear. Danielle stood near the entrance, dressed in a crisp suit, her shoulders squared despite the years of pain and uncertainty she'd endured. Her presence was magnetic, a living testament to resilience and grace. The mayor took the podium first, his voice strong and clear as he recounted the harrowing day when a nurse risked everything to save a Marine's life. Danielle Harmon's bravery is not just a story of heroism, he said, but a beacon for all who believe in compassion, courage, and standing up for what is right. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. A representative from the White House stepped forward, medal in hand, ready to bestow the highest honors upon Danielle. The room fell silent, the weight of history settling in. Elijah, standing just off to the side, watched with pride swelling in his chest. When the applause erupted, it wasn't just polite clapping, it was a roar of gratitude that echoed through the hall. And then Elijah stepped onto the stage, crossing the distance between them in a few long strides. He wrapped Danielle in a strong embrace, holding her as if to shield her from the world's hardships. "This woman saved my life," he said, voice thick with emotion. "And today, we honor her the way she deserved all along." The crowd rose to their feet, the standing ovation a powerful symbol of collective respect and admiration. Weeks later, Danielle returned to the clinic, not as the nurse who had been cast aside, but as the new director of emergency care. The hallways she once walked as a patient now echoed with the sounds of staff and patients celebrating her return. Nurses smiled with newfound pride, patients greeted her with warmth, and the atmosphere was charged with hope. One afternoon, a young patient approached Danielle, clutching a crayon drawing, her own small tribute. It depicted Danielle wearing a cape, flying above the clinic. Danielle knelt down, her eyes softening, and whispered, "Real heroes don't wear capes. They just care." Her journey, from risking everything in a split second to becoming a leader shaping the future of emergency care, was a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and the unwavering belief that one person's actions can spark change. Danielle's story, born in the face of violence and deep injustice, ended not in silence or defeat, but in legacy and undeniable grace. It reminded the world that true heroism is not about following rules blindly, but about standing up for what is right, even when it costs everything. This story, shared by millions, inspired a movement, one that continues to shine a light on the heroes among us, those who care fiercely, act bravely, and change lives forever.